Good morning, a late good morning to you. I hope everybody can hear me. If my voice should fade, just throw something at me, but don't hit the cross or Mary here. I've never been married and I don't have children, so I don't know how to yell. So I have to depend upon the mic. It's really, and could some, is this my glass of water or somebody else's? Yours. There we go. Got everything I need. It's really a great gift and a privilege to be at this conference. It's been full of graces for me, just quite astonishingly. I've met so many wonderful people, had some great conversations, got some incredibly important information, learned a lot from the speakers. And it's just wonderful that people come together like this. And we're going to have to do this more and get to know each other and who we are and who we can rely upon and who we can trust for different things. These are not unprecedented in the history of mankind, but unprecedented for most of us for what we're going to have to do. Some of you have been wondering what I've been going to talk about today. You know, there are no titles to talks. It's kind of interesting. I've been wondering too what I'm going to talk about. Father Lovell didn't give titles because he knows that speakers often at the very last minute say, well, I have a great idea. I want to change my topic. Actually, after the talks yesterday and this morning, he told me he was going to cancel the rest of the speakers today and asked me to use my time to correct the errors of previous speakers. Okay. Oh, it's not true. Okay. So one thing I love about the conference is this icon of St. John the Baptist. And I have to admit, I might have chosen another one of St. John the Baptist with his head on a platter. All right. I haven't seen too many of these in American churches, but they're all over Europe. Great paintings of the head of John the Baptist's head on a platter. And years ago, I gave a talk, I give it frequently on how to preach on difficult topics to gatherings of priests. And I always opened with a slide of the head of John the Baptist on a platter. It may have been counterproductive. Kind of discouraged those who were afraid of having their heads chopped off and encouraged others who did then get their heads chopped off. And that's part of the problem we face. We want this courage from our priests. We want them to be bold, but then they're no longer in operation, right? So what do? Do we ask them to stick their heads up and get blown to pieces, or do we ask them to keep their heads down and virtually live a little bit of a cowardly life? I'll talk a little bit more about that. Again, teaching priests how to preach on hard topics leads to fewer priests teaching on hard topics. There's kind of a Zeno paradox of some kind there. As many of you know, I'm retired, and I no longer teach seminarians, and have turned my attention to dealing with the sex abuse crisis, largely by writing about it, by helping victims, falsely accused priests, and interacting with activists. I'm not well equipped for this work and hope I do more good than harm, or that God will release me from this assignment. But I've also been learning about promoting and defending the traditional Latin Mass. I have 5 or so books nearly finished. I don't want to have I think for some reason too much about the title of my autobiography that I don't have much intention of writing, but and one of the titles I've talked about, which is fitting, is A Life of Unfinished Projects, and that too may be unfinished. So I'd like to live long enough to publish those books that I have nearly done, so pray for me for discernment and discipline. Now, I've been a fervent defender of the church most all of my adult life. I simply love Jesus and his church, as I know you do. What's the deepest, most important thing of our lives is our love for Jesus and his church. But I've been terribly naive, and sometimes think a fitting title, again, of my autobiography might be A Life of Criminal Naivete, or The Life of a Useful Idiot, even. In spite of being someone who loves a battle, I'm also something of a Pollyanna. I trust way too easily. Distrust, skepticism, and cynicism don't come easily to me. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. We never locked our doors. I didn't know why cars had locks on them, or almost why doors had locks on them. I could go, as a small child, I could ride my bike all over town, and there was no worry about what might happen to me. I could even just go up to a stranger's door if something happened, knock and ask for help. We had no fears of that kind. Certainly, we respected all authority figures. We definitely never thought they were in the wrong. The teachers, priests, policemen were always 100% right and to be trusted in my home. It took a McCarrick to wake me up, and it's been a painful and disruptive awakening. 5 years ago, when I began thinking almost incessantly about the sex abuse crisis in the church and the dominance of the lavender mafia in the hierarchy of the church, I realized that the only ones who can solve the problem in the church are the bishops. And the problem is the bishops themselves, right? So it really is only the Holy Spirit. We cannot look to the bishops. If anybody says a sentence, the bishops should, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, there's nothing intelligible that you can put after that would have make any sense at all, because they simply won't. And you don't know who they are if you start a sentence with the bishop should do anything that pointed honestly towards the good. So I've come to believe that those who aren't shockingly corrupt and pathetically weak, cowardly, and complicit, with the exception that there just aren't any, with the exception of a very, very few. I've happened to work closely with a few of them. I know there's very, very few. I know there are some, and I hope someday, I don't know how they got where they are. One time I asked one of those bishops, how did you get through the process? And, he was considered to be a weak man, and he was considered to be not to have a backbone, and he was considered to be just an efficient administrator. But he's a whole lot more than that, and they didn't see it because they don't know how to see it. They're not looking for it, right? And so he's been appointed. He's been given some of the most unpleasant jobs that anybody would like to have. But I believe him to be good, bold, and true, and there's more than one of these men. Now, the corruption is of so many kinds and so pervasive and entrenched that it's hard for most of the laity to grasp it. We just can't get it. We love our priests, we've loved our bishops, and we love our church. And we cannot believe that the corruption is as deep and pervasive as it is. We just sit there and go, I can't believe that. I just can't believe that. And so when I first started doing this, when I talked to people doing it for years, that is looking into the extent and nature of the abuse and corruption in the church, they kept telling me, you just won't believe it. And you'll keep finding out it's worse than you think. And then it's worse than you think, and it's worse than you think. And I think it's very, very, very bad. And I'm not certain I've hit bottom yet, right? I'm not certain I've hit bottom yet. Every once in a while, we get a glimmer of the kind and extent of the corruption and depravity when the scandalous activity of some members of the episcopacy comes to light. We've seen that there is the problem of teaching heterodoxy, persecuting those who teach orthodoxy, money laundering, which I'm starting to learn about, which is unbelievable, all right, through the Vatican Bank and other places. Predatory, you all know about this, homosexual and heterosexual abuse of children and vulnerable adults, cover-up of the same. Cruel dismissal of victims, and even ritual satanic sexual abuse and child trafficking. Okay, I'm starting to see more and more of that, and I just like everybody else, it's really hard to believe, all right? But it's there, and it's not unusual. Right, and we're going to see more of it. There are many reasons that the attempts of laity and even some high churchmen to repair and destroy the church have failed. The evil is virtually everywhere. but especially present in the most powerful portions of the church. The problem is there is really no effective mechanism in the church for addressing these problems. There's none, right? Vos Estis, the document that was to enable laity to report abuse, has largely been a joke, for it involves reporting bishops to bishops. And if it works only because the other bishops want that bishop removed, not because it's a system of justice, all right? It's just another tool for bad bishops to use, most likely against other bad bishops that they don't want there for some reason. So the problem is this, as we talked a bit through the conference. The bishops are responsible for nominating those who become new bishops. They recommend clones of themselves, right? They groom them. They pick them out long before they get to the level. They're groomed in seminary, of course. They're corrupt, as we've taught, company men who willingly toe the line and do as their superiors bid, because that is what they are by temperament and what they've been trained to be in seminary and throughout the priesthood, right? They are little clones of their superiors. So they're not going to criticize their superiors. They're not going to buck their superiors. They're made in the image of their superiors, okay? Most of them, likely have done something known to others that make them subject to fear of exposure and thus can be controlled. The church is absolutely ruled by the implicit fear of blackmail, right? There's something on every one of them. There's a high cardinal once who told people he would not hire anyone that he did not have something on, right? He knew how to control people, right? Fear, right? They were chosen because they have that fear. They want someone who's afraid and can be controlled. These bishops, our bishops, I'm sorry to say most of our bishops, almost all of our bishops, have no idea how to do the brave and right thing. Number one, they don't know what it is. And second, they wouldn't want to do it if they did, right? They were trained to be that way, right? They were trained to get along, go along to get along to go along, whichever way. I love the cliches, but I often don't get them right. And I mean, there's been some criticism of John Paul II and Benedict for their selection of bishops, but I'm not sure it's very justified, because as one speaker said, the Pope cannot possibly know these men, and they have to trust those who are recommending these men. And at least while John Paul II and Benedict were in office, bad bishops knew that they had to appoint people who looked like good bishops, right? Because Benedict and John Paul II wouldn't accept them unless they were assured that they were men of great orthodoxy, etc. The seminary that I taught at, Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit, was one of the worst breeding grounds for homosexual bishops in the United States for decades. If you look at the number of bishops that were appointed that came out of the Sacred Heart Seminary in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 20s, it's a lot, right? And these are some of the worst bishops that we've had in the United States. The seminary was grooming homosexual men to become bishops, and might have had the ear of John Paul II because he was Polish. Szako was Polish, right? And so John Paul II trusted men of his own ethnicity, if you will. And so you say, I mean, how did John Paul II, and honestly, even now, when any bishop goes into a diocese, even if you were a good bishop, a man that wanted to be a good bishop, he's surrounded by very bad men, all right, who lie to him, right? And they're very charming, they're very effective at lying, they're very effective at duplicity. So how do they know who to appoint to this position or that position? I have a bit of a litmus test. Again, find the canceled priest. Find the priest that's at the periphery of the diocese who's been exiled. If you want to know who the good ones are, find out the ones who've had the most unattractive assignment. It's not that you can't be a good priest in any assignment, but most of these men do have a backbone, which I would think is an essential feature of a bishop. But in our church, it's not having a backbone that is an essential feature for someone to become a bishop. Okay, so I was brought to Sacred Heart Seminary along with several other really excellent, faithful faculty to make Sacred Heart Major Seminary into a bastion of orthodoxy. At the time, before that, honestly, most seminaries would have put a moat around it to keep me out. And most of the other faculty at the seminary when I was teaching there, it still is that way. But I'm afraid to say, I think it was largely done to give John Paul II and Benedict the impression that Detroit is a good place, and a place where you could trust those who had been ordained. Now, I know that quite a few of the young men when I was there who were ordained are excellent priests, excellent, right, stellar, right. It might have been a golden age. I don't know if it's come to an end or not. I don't think the standards are quite as high as they were at the same time. I tell people, I was there when the Dallas Charter was being decided and the whole revelation of sexual abuse, pedophilia, and I was as shocked as anyone. And I'd read The Wanderer in the decades before and knew that there were pockets of homosexual corruption in the church, but I had no idea of the extent of it, and especially of pedophilia. And I had this naive idea, again, well, if the bishops know about it, if I know about it, surely the bishops know about it. And surely they're doing something about it. Surely all over the United States, they're meeting and figuring out how to fix things so that this never, ever happens again. And then this McCarrick story came out. And I was beyond devastated. I was at just everything. I'd gone on the radio in the 2002s and 3s and 4s defending the Catholic Church. This was a glitch. This was not something that was characteristic of the church. Don't accuse the church of being worse as other institutions. And I feel like I was, again, a useful idiot in that way. Okay, so when I got at the seminary, and there was a huge shift, honestly, and I don't mean to denigrate anybody who was ordained, but before the Dallas Charter, or before, I think it was 2005, a document came out of the Vatican that said that seminaries should not accept and ordain men to the priesthood who had a persistent, deep-seated homosexual orientation. Now, before that, I hadn't noticed a huge homosexual element, not that I necessarily would. I don't know that what's called my gaydar is all that good. But I noticed there were a lot of troubled men, psychologically troubled in various ways. And then, and some of them were quite conservative, and no wonder they were troubled. As Father John said, they're put under this pressure cooker, and your head gets all sort of misshapen because of the sort of abuse you're taking from the liberal tendency of the church. But what I noticed is they certainly, it really was a process of taking the backbone out of the young men. From day one, they were told, trust us, keep your head down, stay in your lane, don't rock the boat, all right? Don't question anything we do, all right? Absolutely trust other priests, trust other bishops. Again, and even, again, this bleeds into trusting them when they make homosexual advances on you. Right? That must be okay. This is what's happening. Right? And I don't know that happened so much there, though I know it did earlier than this. The book Good by Good Men, which I think some of you have looked at, which is a great expose of the U.S. Seminaries in the 80s, 90s. The Sacred Heart, a priest of the Sacred Heart of the Detroit Diocese, was the one who was the source of most of that information. Right? So it came right out of Detroit, this grooming of young, looking for men who are homosexuals to bring into the seminary and making it very, very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult for those who were healthy heterosexuals to get through. In small ways, though, I was disturbed, and then I just want to say that after that statement came out, and we attempted to some impressive degree to put it into place, again, to impress Benedict and John Paul II. I guess it'd be Benedict. I noticed an influx of really masculine men. It was visible, right? It was visible. He goes, where'd these guys come from? And it was just like they felt comfortable being there because there was a sign out that was basically saying homosexuals need not apply. And the heterosexual men said, wow, I can go there safely. I won't be hit upon, etc. I can go there. Now, I also meant it did make a difference in teaching. I have to say, I'm not trying to denigrate males, but we have to admit that young men can be boneheaded and lacking nuance, and they need to be, I found myself doing in class something I've never done in all my teaching years. So I'd have to put my finger up and say, listen, I want to tell you boneheaded guys this. And they go like, whoa. And they kind of liked being called boneheaded because they equated that with being masculine, which, there's some truth to that. Now they grow out of it. They grow out of it, of course, but that's a time when, that statement of being rigid was that it had some legitimacy to it. I'm trying to tell them if an 11-year-old girl has an abortion and she's been taken to the clinic by her mother and her guidance counselor told her and her doctor told her it was just a little bit of tissue, and even her priest told her in her case it would be okay. I said, the chances that she has any moral culpability for that is minimal, if non-existent. And if she comes to you when she's 18 and confesses an abortion that she had under those conditions when she was 11, you say, oh, poor girl, I can't believe what happened to you, right? You don't say you murdered your own child, right? And they say, well, natural law tells you that killing is wrong and abortion is killing. I said, yeah, but let's talk about subjective culpability, which is something they had some difficulty getting. Now, I trust that in just a few years of priesthood, that confusion will be gone. They will understand human reality as opposed to some theoretical principles that they accepted and weren't able to apply correctly. But anyway, little things, like I remember one day I'm in the classroom and I'm having trouble opening these huge windows in this very old building. I'm doing this. There were like 8 seminarians in the room, and they're all watching me. And I'm going like, what the heck? Again, if it were 8 of you guys, honestly, all 8 of you would be vying for each other to get over there and help me put the window up, or having trouble with some computer problems very clearly. And really, every time anything like happened in this particular class, it was one guy who got up and helped me. And the others looked like, are we allowed to? Not necessarily didn't want to, all right? That might have been part of it. But, as we know, another beautiful characteristic of males is they want to help females, all right? They want to help females. They want to jump up and help us. And these guys are sitting there, and I'm looking at them, and they're looking at me. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? Is it you're not fully masculine, you don't have that masculine trait of wanting to help females? Or is it that you think you'll get in trouble? And I honestly think to some extent they thought I'd get in trouble, that I might think it's insulting to need help, and I might report them to the administration, or somehow this isn't in the code of conduct for students to help female faculty. God, whoa. So that really, it troubled me a great deal. And then, as we were ordaining some of these very good men, a big challenge was integrating them into the Presbyterate of Detroit, because they were homosexual. And they didn't like the conservative men. Never spent a moment trying to get to know them, not a moment, but just assuming that since they studied under Professor Smith and Ralph Martin and Peter Wims, et cetera, Robert Fastigi, they must be incredibly close-minded people that you couldn't interact with. And one young man said that when he got to the rectory, there was a yellow police line down the rectory. And he was told, you stay on that side and I'm on this side. And some of them never saw their pastor pray. And then the pastor would get mad at them that they'd pray before Mass and after Mass in the church, as if the new priest were trying to make the old priest look bad, right? Put some Latin into the Mass. Oh my gosh, all right? So this is what the young men were facing. Some of those men left the priesthood, all right? It wasn't at all what they they expected. They're lonely to begin with, and then to get into a rectory where you have an older priest who doesn't want to mentor you, doesn't want to shape you. And we actually had a formation director, oh my gosh. He thought it was a good policy to put these conservative priests into a seminary where there was a liberal priest to loosen them up a little bit. And I said, that's never going to happen. I said, they don't get loosened up, they get tightened up. They see it and they don't want to have any part of that. Now, one of my early entry points into realizing the nature and extent of the crisis is I put something on Facebook about the Lavender Mafia, and I get a call from this young man who was now a priest, who was a student of mine at the seminary. And he was being hit upon by his pastor, right, who was a known active sexual predator not a predator, I don't know so much, but he was in a homosexual relationship that was well known. And he told me about it. He didn't even tell me a fraction about it because men don't like to tell what other priests, other males have done to them. What I heard was bad enough, but it was way worse than I heard. I heard from, he told somebody else who told me. And he said, what should I have done, Professor Smith? And I said, well, there I am. So I called up one of my male friends. I said, what should you have done? He said, every male knows. He said, just hit him. He said, he makes a pass at you, you hit him. You push him down. And you know what he had done, he called the vicar general, priest of the diocese, and was told to keep his head down. That this priest was very popular in the diocese and could ruin his career, right? And so I told him this, and I said, you know, I hate to say, and he was a good guy, and he was a masculine man, but confused with what was going on and confused by the kind of formation he had. And I said, you know, we took the backbone out of you at the seminary, and God's trying to put it back, right? And he did. I mean, this guy stood up for himself, and it was a remarkable thing that the priest got us sent away. And I know Father Lovell didn't like St. John Vianney, but some priests do. It's like a spa, you know, it's like a vacation of this beautiful green pastures and good food and people to talk to, and it's all, you know, if you're of a certain inclination, it's just a vacation, right? And they were going to bring him back and put him back in ministry, and the other priests and were giving this young priest the higher ups in the diocese were giving the young priest a hard time, and the priest rose up in some sort of solidarity, not all of them, but enough of them, that told the bishop, if you put the other guy back and you take this guy out, you are going to have a rebellion on your hands, right? And it worked. So, again, one of my early introductions to all of this was when I was a professor at the University of Dallas, and there was the famous Rudy Koss case. Rudy Koss was one of the most early well-known predators in the early 1990s, and he was at the seminary, and that's right at the side of the campus of the University of Dallas. And when he applied to the seminary, his wife sent a letter that says we had been married for his former wife. We'd been married for 5 years, and we never consummated the marriage. And he had a preference for young boys, right? So whoever was the rector at the time wrote on the file, "Not now and not ever," right? A couple years later, a homosexual rector came in, was going through the files, called up Rudy and asked him to reapply to the seminary, right? Gave him a special room at the back of the seminary where he could bring in young men after he'd been out the bars at night. He was placed in 12 different parishes in Dallas area and abused over 100 boys. 11 of them brought a lawsuit against him. One had committed suicide. Brought a lawsuit against him, and I think the settlement, it got reduced, but originally was $130 million, right? And there was a story, there was one priest who was the hero of this story because he testified against Rudy Koss and said they had shared a rectory, and he would always see Rudy Koss taking the boys upstairs and saw them under the covers with him, and to the point where he would start standing at the bottom of the stairs, and whenever he was taking up with a young boy, he'd say, no, go home, call your mother, I'll call your mother, go home, right? So he wrote this in a letter to the bishop. And at court, the letter was shown to the bishop, and the bishop said, "Oh, I don't remember seeing that letter." Do you think you'd forget that if someone wrote you a letter about a priest taking boys up to his bedroom and you're having to send them home? All right. A friend of mine, a priest, went to that seminary, very good man, and he said one of the very first nights he was there, they had a dance. They had a dance at the seminary for the seminarians with each other. And he said the rector came in and sat beside him, and he said, "What are you going to do about this?" He said, "What's wrong?" Okay? I can't believe he stayed in the seminary. He's been a wonderful priest, always on the margin of everything, always on the margin, except his parishioners love him. And soon his parish becomes very popular, lots of money, all sorts of things. And now he has been canceled and is looking for another good home. So one difficulty I had to continue to work at the seminary was that I was learning all of this. And I was, I guess, showing signs of being traumatized by what I was seeing. Now, the young men, I'm not hard to talk about things I shouldn't be talking about. People can push my buttons and I blurt things right out. So the seminary said, "Professor Smith," nobody would talk to them. Nobody would talk to them about the sex abuse crisis. So, "Professor Smith, we hear you're working on the sex abuse crisis." Now, I'd actually been called in by the administration who said, "We're here, you're doing this stuff, but really keep it out of the seminary. These guys are, delicate and vulnerable, and you shouldn't disturb them." So I go down the hall and I said, "Oh, I won't. I promise I won't." I go down the hall, and they ask me a question. "Professor Smith, if we do something when we become ordained, like put Latin in the Mass or give a homily against homosexuality, will the bishops have our back?" I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "What did I just say?" I said, "Absolutely not." And then another class, and so I was asked, "What happens if we see something that's horrible? What do we do?" I said, "Oh my gosh." I said, "Will you pray about it?" I said, "Sometimes God's going to ask you to stick your head up and it's going to get chopped off." I said, "But if you really believe it's not going to do," I'm winding it up. They're saying winding it up. I'm winding it up. Why do you think I'm not winding it up? I got the numbers. I got the numbers right over there. Anyway, so anyway, I reported myself, and I told them, and sometimes God will tell you to keep your head down. I said, "You have to discern this carefully in a conversation with God about what to do." So I reported myself to the administration. And luckily, unbelievably, one of them told me that he'd never heard that Detroit had ever been a problem in the past. I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And then another one said, "Well, Janet, you're right." He said, "Since the Dallas Charter, the bishops are ready to throw us under the bus in a minute." I was kind of glad that such a man was in charge of the seminary. He saw something. And I do know there was one priest at the seminary that actually would take the young men aside and warn them that when they get into the priesthood, there are going to be priests who are going to hit on them. I was glad he did that. But what the heck kind of situation do you have where a priest has to warn a seminarian about priests going to hit upon them when they get into the priesthood? All right, so what do we do? I'm going to take just a couple of seconds. It doesn't matter how much you do this, all right? I'm not going to take long. Okay. I know things, there's a schedule. I want to respect it. But, we need, what do we do? There's almost nothing we can do, honestly. Pray and sacrifice. We have to be prepared to go underground. The persecution by the government in our culture, and sadly our church, is alive and well and warming up. I have no idea how to go underground, but I know there are those who do. And I hope that one of them sometime will put an arm around my shoulder and say, "Come with us," all right? Because I did buy a house that has more than one possibility for a priest hole. And one of in fact, before I even moved in, Father Lovell, who's not listening to what I'm saying and won't know that I'm complimenting him. He was the first. He came before I slept in that house. He came and said a traditional Latin Mass for me and blessed the house. Who's privileged like that? But I look at him and I say, to have a priest hole, I'd have to have a high rise. for this guy, right? It's not going to work. And I have a spot there. I really want to have a chapel, and I just bought a bunch of those beautiful. I might see even this is wrapping it up. Okay. Again, I have always wanted to be a part of some surreptitious underground activity. It just sounds really exciting. Yeah. One problem is I can't keep a secret, all right? So but the lucky thing now is I'm old enough is that I don't remember things. So I'm much more trustworthy than I used to be before. So I actually have established a secret email account. And I know it's not going to be secret anymore because I can't keep a secret, you know? But my name is Mediatrix 2. Mediatrix 1 was already taken. Who is this woman who took Mediatrix 1? I mean, crying out loud. Okay, we need better bishops, all right? Just about all the current ones should resign. It's never going to happen. But so this is what Paul says or is it Timothy? Timothy. Paul said, whoever wrote it, tells us about bishops. For an overseer, an episcopus, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered. Oh my gosh, he's going to drag me off. Or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain. But hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and also to rebuke those who contradict it. That's what Scripture says we need. Have you noticed any of those? The U.S. bishops have been putting together a document about what we need in our priests, and they say our priests must be good spiritual fathers. The number of bishops who are good spiritual fathers is zilch. Again, not zilch. Again, there must be a few. Certainly there's a few, right? But most of them don't know their priests, and when they cancel them, they don't even talk to them. They don't call them. And when they're found guilty of terrible actions, they show no concern for the soul of the priest. They just want, if they don't cover up because he's a favorite, if he's causing too much trouble, they'll get rid of him but not do anything to help him reform his life. So the current job description for bishop, he must be an active homosexual, a lover of luxury, a zealous left-winger in politics, duplicitous, easy cowed by superiors, and capable of being a tyrant, right? I think that covers it. Again, what we can do, not much. But again, getting laity involved in any official capacity won't work, to my mind. The laity will be picked by the bishops, and they will be duped by the bishops, and they will appoint those who the bishops want appointed. What we can do is what some people are doing in various ways, is to look at those who seem to be being groomed for bishops. Keep an eye on them. See where they went to school, who sponsored them, under whom did they study. As pastors, what is the quality of their liturgies? What are the chief topics of their homilies? What conventions do they attend? Who do they invite as speakers to the parish? You compile this information, you don't have to make any accusations. You don't have to say, well, Father invited James Martin, who's a this, that, and that. Just say, Father invited James Martin, right? And that's anybody who needs to know knows. There's other surreptitious things you could do. Use Grindr, all right? Anybody can do that. Anybody can anybody can buy some sort of cheap phone, get a new phone number, stand outside of anywhere and find out who's on Grindr all day long. It can be done. So what are you going to do with that information? Right? What are you going to do with it when you got it? Well, send it to the bishop, not because he'll do anything, but just so he knows that we know. Send it to other bishops in the area. There might just be a good one who would try to do something about it, try to deep six the man's appointment. I mean, especially those who come out of the North American College, all right? Do a deep dive, get a background check. and make it public, because those are the ones who are especially being groomed for the episcopate, all right? Send it to the Catholic media, put it on social media, and then, of course, fast and pray. And they even took the clock away. Look at that. Look at that. Okay. There's confessions this afternoon. I'll go this afternoon. But thank you all. It's been wonderful.